Hey guys, Leigus here today, bringing you a profile on my newly modified Qliphort deck. So as most of you guys already know, the emergency ban list has dropped, and it's already had a massive effect on the Yu-Gi-Oh meta, including causing me to modify my main deck for locals, which is Qliphort's. So getting into the profile, starting off we have one copy of Qliphort Scout. Not really that much to explain here. He's the search for the deck, and I'm assuming most of you guys are already familiar with him. Two copies of Monolith. I used to run him at 3, but with some of the changes to the deck, space had to be made, and he was one of the less essential cards. Now that I'm also running one copy of Luster Pendulum, the Draco Slayer, so he has now been limited, and his price has dropped considerably, which is why I was able to pick one up. And he's got a lot of really cool synergy with the deck that I haven't really seen before in other people's lists, so I'll explain a little bit more with him at the end of the video, but very cool include now. 3 copies of Qliphort Helix and 3 copies of Qliphort Carrier. These are your guys that you want to tribute off in order to get their effects. Carrier will compulse a card back into the hand, and Helix is MST, and I really like these guys. They're probably my favorite cards to run in the deck. 3 copies of Qliphort Stealth. He is really, really good. His protection against your opponent responding to his effect is nice, and there's a lot of really cool utility to bouncing a card to the hand, and he's your main guy that you're going to be trying to tribute for. 2 copies of Qliphort Cephalopod. I did not like him early on, but now that you're running Draco Slayer, it's good to have another 9 scale in the deck, and his effect that gains you life points, not so much the damage, can be very useful to allowing you to continue to perform well in a very long-lasting game. 1 copy of Disc. It's always nice to run him at 2, but you only really need 1, and space had to be made somewhere, and he was one of the less essential cards to the deck. He's your very aggressive card, as he tends to pull 2 copies of Monolith out of the deck just to put a ton of damage into your opponent's face, and it's just good to have him there so that you can do quick wins if your opponent has no real way to respond. A card that I would really consider defining for this build is the 2 main decked copies of Max C. I made a lot of ratio decisions based around the fact that I'm running Max C and the possibility of my opponent taking the Max C challenge, and it's just overall a very good card for building consistency, forcing your opponent to have to kind of alter their strategy to respond to you, and in a deck that really shines when you've just got tons and tons of resources to be able to pump into your opponent. Max C is a great include. Also worth noting, I am not running Upstart Goblin because I'm running Max C, as I'm using them in kind of a similar fashion to try to get consistency and add cards to your hand. Then, because I'm running Max C, and also for a couple other reasons that I will get into later, I'm running 1 copy of Swift Scarecrow to kind of prevent my opponent from killing me, and again, capitalize on that fact that when I can draw into my cards, when I last into the late game, I can usually outvalue my opponent. So now moving on to spells. We've got 3 copies of Summoner's Art, a little bit risky given that I only have 3 normal monsters in the deck, but because I've got a little bit of recycling potential and because of just how important Scout is, I think 3 is really essential, even with the smaller number of targets. 2 copies of Wavering Eyes. I've always really liked this number in the deck. I think that 3 is a little bit excessive, and now that Pepe is out of the scene, there's not really as much draw to run 3, since you're not going to be popping your opponent's scales to search nearly as much now. And it's just a really, really strong, really overpowered card that is slightly held back by the fact that it's conditional and has a little bit of negative synergy with cards like Sacrifice, purely for the fact that it is a spell card that searches rather than a pendulum monster. So if I have Wavering Eyes, I'd much rather have a Qli than Sacrifice. All the same, Sacrifice is an amazing card, that's why it's limited. Always going to get your value out of that guy. 1 copy of Pot of Duality and 1 copy of Pot of Riches. Both of these are really, really good. Used to have Pot of Duality at 2 in the deck, reducing it to 1 because it's really just the occasional hand fixer, and it's a card to draw into with Max C. Because if you're under the Max C challenge, you got to look for those hard removal to really respond to the big play that your opponent made, and having that additional reach from Pot of Duality to dig into the deck, pick the card that you need is really good. And Pot of Riches is excellent recovery, especially given the fact that you can still Pendulum Summon during the turn that you activate Pot of Riches. One copy of Dark Hole, one copy of MST, Dark Hole over Regeki, because they're virtually the same card 9 times out of 10. You're going to be activating Regeki with no monsters on board, and Dark Hole is considerably cheaper. And then MST, because, again, as I mentioned with Max C, it's really good to have something to draw into and to have that one card that you can find as your answer without 3 copies of space just like sitting in your hand, clogging you up, preventing you from doing your combo plays. Moving on to traps, we've got 2 copies of Lose a Turn. Really, really strong card in Qliphort. I think that any Qliphort deck should be running this at 2 to 3. I am personally running it at 2 just because it can be a little bit cloggy to have 2 copies of it in your hand, because the decks that lose really hard to lose a turn usually don't have a way to get rid of it. So I think 2 is a pretty good number to have. 2 copies of Fiendish Chain, just because it has really good utility. Either negating an effect, stopping attacks, or both is super duper good, and the fact that it targets I don't really think is that much of a cost, because there's a lot of stuff that you can hit of your opponents, even if they have cards in their deck that can't be targeted. 2 copies of Soul Transition. I really like this card. It's kind of a hand fixer for the early game, but it's also got a little bit of snaring your opponent potential between Helix and Carry's effects if you contribute them off. The Klee goes to the extra deck, so it's not really like going a minus by tributing off the guy, especially if you get a Qliphort effect from it, and then you draw 2 cards. So overall, I think the pros outweigh the cons of this card. It's very good. For the Floodgates, outside of Lose a Turn, 1 copy of Vanities, 1 copy of Skill Drain, and 1 copy of Imperial Iron Wall. So these 2 are really the defining Qliphort cards that have been around forever. Skill Drain is great because all their guys are Beast King Barbaros, and they get buffed up when their effects are negated, and Vanities because they're playing a Pendulum deck. So you can just keep normal summoning a monster every turn, really spamming your opponent down, and Vanities will not die with your monsters because they don't go to the grave. Imperial Iron Wall is a very nice card, just because it has decent disruptive ability against Monarchs. It's a pretty good card there. Absolutely devastating in the Cosmo matchup, and chaining it to Bottomless Trap Hole causes your Pendulums to go back to the extra deck instead of being banished because they are simply destroyed. So really good protective potential from Imperial Iron Wall, and it hurts absolutely nothing in my deck. That's the really nice thing about these cards, is they really don't disrupt me very much. And then for Summon Negation, 1 copy of Solemn Warning because it's the best summon negation in the game right now, and 1 copy of Bottomless because it hits Dark Destroyer, it hits a big Pendulum play. It's just overall a very useful card regardless of what you're chaining it to. So now I'm going to briefly cover a few of the very potent combos that Qliphort have. So this is probably the most conventional combo, where you would open with a hand of something like this, and then 1 other card. That other card doesn't really matter. You would play Scout, search for Monolith, activate these 2 guys in the scale, Pendulum Summon for 2 of your Qliphorts. It doesn't really matter what these are. Tribute them off to get their effects if you're going second. If you're going first, you're just going to set this up this way to summon Stealth, who will target Scout, to return him to your hand so that you've got a little bit of protection there. And then during the end phase, Monolith draws you 2 cards, which is nice. Kind of the alternate combo that has now been opened up by the inclusion of Draco Slayer in the list is something that looks a little bit like this. You can also do this with Cephalopod, which is the reason that you're including him in the deck as an additional 9 scale, but you can play Draco Slayer, activate Carrier to duplicate him, get an additional copy, activate Helix in the scale, Pendulum Summon for these 2 guys, and Tribute for Stealth or Cephalopod, etc. You get a decent amount of advantage with that, and you can continue doing so by then getting rid of this Helix in the next turn to search another one. A lot of good utility from Draco Slayer, especially with this next thing that I'm going to show you, which is the most devastating combo. So, you can now 3-card combo with Scout, or something that searches him, Draco Slayer, and any Qliphort, because you can play Draco Slayer, activate your Qliphort, duplicate it, using his effect to get an additional 1. Activate Scout, search off of Scout, typically for Stealth. Pendulum Summon for these 2. Tribute off for Stealth, either aggressively or to return Scout. And that was really, really cool, because now you have 2 other cards in your hand that can be traps, or maybe Max C, or other things to help disrupt your opponent. Another thing that's really cool is the next turn you can either activate Scout, or maybe you didn't pop him with Stealth or whatever. Essentially, you would search off of Scout just so that you don't miss his effect. You can Pendulum Summon once you have done your search, remove him with Draco Slayer, and now your extra deck is live again because you no longer have any Qliphorts in the scale. You can overlay 2 of your guys into a rank 4, and it's just really great that Draco Slayer enables you to use extra deck stuff again. Gonna go back to lose a turn quickly for a second to show you some of the interesting synergy that you've got there. So Pendulum Summoning under lose a turn, obviously all of your stuff is going to flip into defense, which is not ideal, but when you tribute them off for another monster, they still get their effects, because the errated version of lose a turn no longer follows to the extra deck, which is really cool. Also, the fact that they were negated when they're summoned means that even though they can't attack that turn, when you turn them to attack position after that point, they are now at their full 2400 or 2800, which is really cool. And the last thing that is absolutely excellent about lose a turn is this particular combo, where you've got lose a turn face up, and you tribute summon for disc, summon out 2 copies of Monolith, neither of which go to defense, because even though they were special summoned, they are not effect monsters. So not only do they have higher attack than all the other guys, but they work really well under lose a turn because they do not get flipped to defense. So this OTK is still live under lose a turn. And that's really the main reason that all Qliphort decks should be running this card. Last but not least, touching on Swift Scarecrow and just all of the different ways that you can draw into Swift Scarecrow on your opponent's turn. Max C, I already stated, as the primary one. That is really great. Monolith in the end phase allows you to draw cards. You can potentially find Swift Scarecrow that way. And you also have Soul Transition, which you're typically attempting to activate on your opponent's turn. So it's drawing cards that you can't immediately use, but if you potentially draw into Swift Scarecrow, that can win you the game. So between these 3 cards, the amount of drawing that I do that gets me cards that I can't activate right away unless they are a hand trap, I think makes Swift Scarecrow a very valuable include. So, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments. Should I change something about the build? Do you absolutely hate Qliphorts? Do you love them like me? Let me know, and I will see you guys later.